Hey guys, my name is Jordan Koss. Welcome to the Almost Essential podcast. This 16-episode series is based off my final project for my Doctorate of Ministry degree at Fuller Theological Seminary. The title of that final project is Almost Essential Evangelists, Improving Retirement Asset Accumulation for Mainstream Church of Christ Pastors. In this series, we will interview 8 different specialists in 8 separate episodes. And we will also interview 2 pastors from each of 8 different regions around the U.S. This final project was inspired by 10 years of ministry in 3 different churches of Christ from Georgia to Northern California from 2010 to 2019, as well as my time as a financial professional in training in 2020. That is where I learned about the retirement crisis America is in and will be experiencing in the coming years. Now, I have 3 goals for this podcast. 1, provide an accessible, denomination-specific qualitative conversation for Church of Christ pastors and leaders. 2, introduce leaders and listeners to retirement vehicles and strategies they may not have heard about before. And 3, provide encouragement, motivation, and knowledge to save for the last third of life. Thank you for listening and enjoy. All right, welcome to the Almost Essential podcast. Once again, my name is Jordan Koss, your host, and I believe this is episode 12 of 16 in our series of season 1 of this podcast. And I'm excited because we are going to have another pastor conversation with pastors from the Mid-Atlantic region. Actually, we have 2 pastors from the state of California, but on either ends, east and west. But first, let me go ahead and introduce once again my co-host, Lars Coburn. Lars, say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, it's great to be again on the podcast here from the Pacific Northwest in Eugene, Oregon at Bushnell University, where I serve as the Director of University Relations, doing church relations work. And after 10 years of being a pastor, I'm just excited to support pastors. And I think one of the ways we can do that is having conversations that really matter. I was just today having a conversation about my own personal finances and getting some coaching. So I think we all could improve in that area. I got my undergrad in accounting. Not all pastors do that. So as we listen to stories, I'm excited to hear how others approach retirement and their finances as well. And man, Jordan, this is coming up on about 7 years of our friendship or so. And it's just been really a blessing to get to be part of this journey with you as you finish up your doctorate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's been a good run so far for 7 years, and I appreciate you helping me out in this podcast and definitely bringing some value and bringing some perspective that I in no way, shape, or form could have on this podcast alone. So thank you very much. And so let us now introduce our 2 pastors. Let's go ahead and start with Peter. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, so I'm on the western end of the state of New York, and originally, though, this is not a New York accent. So originally came from Australia and moved to the States, and first came over to attend seminary in '99. Have been up here in Rochester, New York for about 15 years, working with a church here. So my background was also undergrad in accounting. I worked for several years in as public practice, so tax returns, auditing, that kind of thing in Australia. When I moved to the US, I really had no interest in learning a new system, so I just pay everybody to do my taxes and my investments these days. But that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
All right, great to have you.
All right.
Yeah, and so Patrick, go ahead and say a few words about yourself.
I was going to say, I'm here from both the southern and eastern ends of New York, in that special sweet spot where it's both. And I've been here on Long Island for a little over 9 years now. My undergraduate degrees are not directly related to this, psychology, biblical languages. So I come from a different undergraduate firmament, but we'll see what I can do to hold my own.
All right, great. Awesome, guys. So why don't we go ahead and jump into the conversation and the Q&A. And in question 1, you were asked to read a chapter in what I've written so far in my project. And this chapter you were supposed to read was on the theology, kind of foundational theology for preparing to save or saving for retirement. And I looked at several theologians. I had to look at theologies on money and possessions because nobody's written a theology about retirement yet that I have found. So Craig Bloomberg wrote a couple books, a more academic version and a more friendly version for those who don't have academic training. Walter Brueggemann wrote a really good theology of wealth and possessions, and his words about in his book The Land also played a part in that chapter. Ben Witherington wrote a series about talking about things that we often don't talk enough about, where he does discuss retirement, but ironically, he really didn't talk that much about retirement. And he borrowed some thoughts from Sandra Wheeler's work as well, that she wrote back in the 90s on the subject of money and possessions. So let me ask you this initial question based upon that analysis of those 4 authors that you read. What stood out to you most from their discussions about applying theology of money and possessions to retirement?
I'll go because I don't like
right.
silences. But Patrick, had his mouth open. He was poised.
I'm long poised.
So I think it's interesting, as we try to. But here's where I go, is that the theology that they want to try and reconstruct is Old Testament or it's New Testament. So you're talking about ancient Near Eastern culture. If you're looking at the Pentateuch, and the Mosaic Law, you're looking at Greco-Roman culture. If you're looking, at the New Testament. And then we're trying to say, what principles can we extract from that to apply within our culture? And by our, I very much mean, right, Western, I don't even know if it's all Western Christianity or Western culture as much as just the United States. And I think for me, the difficulty in trying to construct a theology from those sources of this topic is that it's not going to be something, I don't think, that's really going to, how do you make it transferable to somebody in a developing country, or in a culture with a financial system markedly different from this country and this culture. So I just think a lot of the cultural stuff there is why you see these theologians who are great, have written, I've read books and in so many areas by them, struggling so much, as well as having a lack of financial, expertise, but struggling to make the application to this particular culture. Because as soon as you start saying, hey, it's great, it's fine for Christians to accumulate and save for retirement, and then you're like, okay, now tell me about your brothers and sisters, in Cambodia. How does this relate to them? It's like, they can save for retirement too, and they're just trying to get by, and so there's a lot of this. I thought that Wheeler really did a good job of her four categories of the tensions that just make this such an awkward conversation to have. So anyway, that we can come back to that part about Wheeler, but I think the cultural stuff initially is just makes it difficult.
Totally. Yeah. I don't think I could do any better than them if I tried. So Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean that's more or less where I was going. What stood out to me particularly was the difficulty in dealing with that retirement end game. This extra biblical.
Mm-hmm.
It's not biblical, but I want to call it unbiblical because sometimes people will take that to a different. It's just not in the Bible, okay? Along with Zoom and running water and all of that, draw from.
We're making necessary inferences,
extra
Patrick.
Biblicity, whatever you will. But this ultra biblical concept of retirement as an individualized, self-contained personal care system. And scripture, nor any culture from which scripture borrows, doesn't begin to contemplate anything like that, because no country anywhere ever has contemplated anything like that until the Western society recently. And so there is huge theological deadlifting to be done here, because there's tremendous work to translate whatever those principles, whatever that understanding might be, into something that makes sense in an economic world that frankly makes no sense in the biblical schema. Right. I mean, that's where the heavy lifting is economically, I think, is, there are a lot of different theological approaches, and, they're all informed and well-equipped theologians. But even if they were CPAs, I think they would still flounder at this unresolved, really just pointless indicator that says, oh, yeah, follow the Bible. And then when you get to retirement, I don't know, man, just do your best.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's funny. That's good. Lars.
Oh,
go ahead. Oh, yeah. Lars, what are your thoughts, man?
Oh, I mean, I think I think I like that idea of, okay, we're trying to follow the Bible when it's clear and explicit. How do we follow the Bible when it's not clear, or maybe it's missing? And I think that's helpful. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot when it comes to retirement is maybe the idea of God's rest. And I don't know that this would be the language we would use, but the promised land and the Hebrew writer kind of picks up on this view of God's rest and coming out of the Sabbath idea, and then the promised land is tied into that. And I wonder if that's maybe a good look at it, is that we ought to see retirement and this vision of God as an invitation into the seventh day, the rest of God. And often out of that can come some really, really great fruit. And so it's not we're not active and we're not actually contributing to society, which again, that's my capitalistic American ideas. You got to be useful for it to be good. And I think we can resist that a little bit with a biblical understanding of rest. But you're right, there's not really a retirement scheme in there. And then I think as we've had these conversations, and I'm curious today if we'll go down here a little bit, but my initial thought on the theology stuff is just that Ecclesiastes would be a rich book to look at from a perspective of the teacher and the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom and wealth and possessions. And maybe there's some wisdom there, though not one that we can just pluck out and say, here's 5 steps to the good retirement, right? It's more of a philosophical quest. And so I like what you're saying, like, oh yeah, how do you follow the Bible when it's not there? Yeah, just like we are on Zoom, we're following the Bible, hopefully in civil conversation. But yeah, Jordan, you mentioned the land quite a bit, and stuff. I wonder if you'd give a little summary of Brueggemann's thing for the listeners, and then because I think this is a helpful thing that we've talked about, and but if you're not going to read your paper, help us a little bit understand that.
Yeah, and so the one place where many these writers, the theologians that I looked at, went to try to have this conversation, start to have this conversation theologically about retirement, was the Nazareth Manifesto of Luke 4, where Jesus frames his ministry in light of Jubilee. And Jubilee is that teaching in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, particularly in Deuteronomy, let's say, of every 50 years, here's what you need to do. You need to, set the captives free. You need to make sure that there's no poor among you. Everybody gets to return to their land, especially if they had to sell it for debt slavery. You free those slaves and captives. You give them their land back. And so there's like a total, the reset button is hit every 50 years in Israel. What does that look like? This land principle, because that was the goal in the entire biblical story for Israel. Like, the promised land, that's what you're looking forward to, life with God in that land that he gave them, known as Canaan. And therefore, in his book, The Land, he's like, okay, how can we do in our culture what they did for every Israelite in the Jubilee every 50 years? He says this: in a mass urban society, everyone must have the social economic equivalent of land. What do you think is that equivalent in our context? And is it retirement savings, or is it something else? At least I tried to explore that in the paper. What do you guys think?
I can understand retirement savings framed in terms of the land. But my sense is that the land is more than that. Mm-hmm. It's more than just having retirement saved. It's dignity, it's community, mm-hmm. right? One does not have land without having neighbors.
No way.
They may be far away, but so I think that's a helpful framing, but I would extend the frame beyond retirement savings, mm-hmm. and think of that post-work period in life as one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like in the introduction chapter, I discuss what's the definition of retirement, and is this something that's even necessary to talk about or necessary for flourishing in the last third of life? Several authors that I looked at who published through the Alban Institute, one did not mention, economic flourishing, having enough money, retirement savings at all. But another one talked about how, having enough money allows you to flourish in all these other necessary components that make your life thrive, may help you thrive in life in general, especially in the last third of life. And so, Peter, I don't know what your thoughts were on this idea of Brueggemann and what he had to say about that in the land.
No, I mean, I just wonder if we can just do a one for one. I mean, for so many people, the urge to own your own house has been part of the American dream. I mean, mm-hmm. that's your white picket fence, suburbia, and for there it was, however many acres of ground. But I think too, like if I want to explore that, try and make this leap from that culture to ours, is economically the land that they were promised was not just an asset. It was a source of income. It was, mm-hmm. they would have, in a agrarian society, they're going to farm it. Mm-hmm. They're going to, it'll be their sustenance to get them through the winters. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a communal aspect, because maybe not everybody was able to grow the same crops, and so they pitched in to help one another. But I think it's when we think of, I have my house and that's my one for one, and I mean even that dream is changing, I think, rapidly at the moment, with property prices putting a lot of people out of the market. But with a, but I think there's also an income. We would say there's an income aspect there because our house doesn't. If I have a mortgage on my house, and I don't generate any income from it. It doesn't. I mean, yes, it's shelter, but it doesn't help me get through the year. For them, having the land was having food, having income. So perhaps it's I think it was God's way of providing food and shelter for his people. A stability. You belong after being nomads and being refugees and being slaves. Now you belong and you have a place. And so for us, I think it's it's probably a job and a house. And when you lose the job, now it becomes your retirement. How are you going to survive?
Mm-hmm.
And where are you going to live? Are just these core questions that we all have. God addressed it for Israel when he put them in a land and gave them land and guaranteed that every family would have their own land. And for us, I think all of that asset and income is like, how do we provide that? I'll just say, and then I'll shut up. Sorry, but I think our question is, or the problem that Christians and churches find ourselves in, is that we live within an economic system that is one way, and we're trying to say, oh, but look, here's this theology, and there's this really practical element there to say, is it even possible to implement this theology or these principles into the economic system with which we live?
Right.
And it may be that person in Cambodia is going to be able to do a much better job in their economic system than we are in ours. I don't know, but pick a country, pick a place around the world.
Yeah.
Just because we're here doesn't mean that we're in the best setting for actually making this application.
No, I think
it really is a crisis of our own making. We've created conditions in which we are no longer prepared for the conditions we've created.
Well, we as a nation and as an economic system,
correct,
that we as Christians and followers of God are now struggling to reconcile, and most of us are part of both of those groups.
Yeah, there's this. It reminds me of this question I want to ask you in a couple. After a couple of these next couple questions, but let me ask you this. Theologically, is the American DIY retirement crisis this justice issue that will result in millions being in elder poverty now and moving into the future as the boomers more and more retire, and millennials as well, not too soon, not too far ahead. Is this something that you feel like deserves to be not? How about this? Like preached about? Does this deserve our theological attention and teaching to the community of faith?
I think it absolutely deserves our attention.
Okay.
I think it needs to be better articulated before it's something that needs to be preached about. I think there needs to be more work done on what the word is being preached. Right now, we can, sort of say, well, look out, there's a crisis ahead. But, that's not exactly preaching.
Yeah.
In a typical sustainable church system, that's not something you can get away with week after week after week after week. So I think more of this work, like what you're doing, Jordan, and trying to seriously task biblical understanding to be mapped onto this very unfamiliar land in terms of cultural, socioeconomic similarity between what's behind the text and what's behind our text.
Yeah. Peter, any thoughts?
Well, the challenge for pastors, right, is that we're often, it can come across as we're fundraising.
Yeah.
So hey, you guys aren't contributing enough because I'm not getting paid enough, and if you were contributing more, I'd be paid more. So there's this credibility. There is so much tension around talking about money. And I think you critique somewhere in your chapter about people writing in general terms rather than specific, because we get into trouble with specific. There's an old story I've heard told. Sorry, you're interviewing a pastor. About a guy that used to preach against too much materialism, and he used as an example people that had 2 cars in their driveway until his wife got a job and the kids were in school. His wife got a job and they needed 2 cars, and then the illustration became 2 cars and a boat in their driveway until his teenage son took up an interest in fishing, and then the illustration became 3 cars in the driveway until his teenage son went to college. And so what we have is this moving target of wealth and excessive wealth, and I can speak to a room and it doesn't matter who's in there, but the rich, there's 2 extremes. The rich are either all of us because we live in the United States, in which case, it's sort of like just this academic thing about who's rich and who's poor because everyone's rich because we live here. Or the rich are always, 10% more, make 10% more than we do, plus at least 10% more than we do. And so very few want to identify themselves as rich because now it's hard to get into the kingdom of heaven. Right. Now they've got to give away with that. So if you can't even define it, I think it'd be, I don't know if you do this anywhere in your paper, but, say what is a target retirement amount, in 2023, as a benchmark, I mean, you have the stats for what people have. So we lack the specifics because we can't agree on what's rich. If you make X amount, and when nobody knows that, how much should a pastor make? How much should a pastor get towards retirement? How much should a pastor have in retirement? How does that compare with average members? How does it compare with a school teacher with similar experience? How does it compare? Like, we're looking for all these reference points. There's nothing in scripture except rich and poor. And everybody defines it in their own image.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think as you guys were talking, I was thinking a little bit about the isolation that happens in old age and in retirement. That is a symptom of the isolation that we've, the cup that we're drinking right now in our cultures. And so, some of that poverty and impoverished nature, some of the need for a benchmark of this is how much I need for enough in retirement. Maybe sometimes we need more if we're more isolated, right? If we need to have care outside of our family system, or, then we're going to need to be able to pay for a nursing home or some sort of care facility. That's going to cost a lot more than if I have a support system that's able to care for me. And it made me think about the work of some of those guys, the Art of Neighboring project. And they were talking a little bit about, I think this went on in Denver, and how the civic leaders were coming together and saying if churches could just help neighbor well and care for their neighborhoods. And I thought, Patrick, as you were talking about the land, you got to have neighbors then. Like, I think there's something to that in the church community, we need to get back to a care of providing for each other's needs. And that's going to look different. I mean, I think in the Acts 2 community, there were rich and poor, but there was enough because the rich did at times provide for the needs of the poor. But it didn't mean that they automatically elevated everybody to be on the same, pattern. And I think that's where we we may look and realize that the person in Southern California who's retired is going to have more assets, or in the Northeast are going to have more assets than maybe in the Midwest or in Kansas, or, that's just practical. And so I would struggle with the same thing, Peter, to try and come up with a bullseye for that moving target. But I do wonder if the justice issue of kind of the Nazareth Manifesto, the land, that Jubilee ethic has got to address our loneliness, our isolation, kind of the poverty of that. And I think money and assets are part of that picture, but they're not everything. And I think it's going to look a little different. And it might mean that I have a retirement as a minister so that I can provide for others in my community, in a different way than I was from the pulpit, right? And that's just kind of where I go. Yeah, I think there is something to it, but it's got to be about addressing the kingdom of God. And I think on one of the other episodes we looked at that kind of idea of what is enough. I think it was John Mark Hicks. So maybe you guys spin that episode up
2
when we have it posted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we spoke with John in episode 2, kind of helped us understand some of the our sociological, historical origins for perhaps why we are where we're at in terms of Church of Christ pastors and saving for retirement. But there's a great history in the Stone Cabin movement, the apocalyptic tradition of helping the poor. And John Mark Hicks himself talks about that, and in Embracing Creation, he talks about the Nazareth Manifesto himself. He doesn't take it to the direction of retirement, but he does what Richard Middleton does in The New Heavens and New Earth, and say this should touch every single facet of our lives. Well, okay, let's take that then and touch retirement. What does it mean to bring justice into our modern retirement crisis in America, where there's going to be a whole lot of poor people, and we're working with a broken system and broken vehicles that don't do or asking them to do? How do we solve this communally as the church instead of individualistically in light of the Jubilee ethic? And in light of that thought, I want to ask 2 more questions, and we'll move further on in terms of your own story. We talked about how we've got this system that we have in America, and we have this theology, and they don't go together. So at the end of the chapter, we talked about expanding our imaginations in terms of how do we theologically try to confront this crisis, the social justice issue. We need to find financial vehicles and means that are better suited to live out the Nazareth Manifesto economically, both individually and communally, as a Jubilee community. So do you think there's anything that the church could do right now that perhaps we haven't been doing to kind of confront this issue?
Oh, you're asking for specifics? Because, generally the answer is yes.
Yeah, generally it's yes. Yeah, I know. This is again, this is tough. Like you're saying, it's tension. We're talking about money, but we're talking about something that Scripture doesn't talk about. So yeah, obviously, Gil Arducci says traditional vehicles, 401k, IRA, Social Security, they're not doing it. They're leading to this crisis. What could the church utilize outside of that possibly could perhaps work better, not only to help individuals save retirement better, but also communally, help the community help each other out?
Yeah, I guess where I naturally sort of go to there is we need a better financial ethic, period. Retirement savings in that world, that post-work world, are part of that financial language. But I'm not sure that in churches we're speaking a language that really prepares us for that question.
Yeah.
I don't know that, we all say, yes, I wanted to save for retirement, but if you're not actually carving that out, then how much do you actually want to save? So I think we need a better ethic, and we need far better practice.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of talking about things, we need to actually do things.
Yeah.
So perhaps some sort of practical workshop of getting people set up and started, and a little tech support to walk through the website kind of business. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Peter, any thoughts?
Well, our church here has worked with Crown Financial Ministries, and it's nothing. We've offered that to the community, and basically what it is just budgeting. Can you budget? Can you control your expenses and not spend more than you get in? So I think that's a great financial help. Some of our members. One of the good things about that is that as a church, we say, look, we've got an elder and a deacon and somebody else who's an accountant, and they're all trained on this particular thing, and they can sit down with you and help you, when you get into a spot. And so when people come and ask us for financial assistance, that's part of that. It's like, yeah, we're happy to help you pay your electric bill this month. But, maybe this would be a good time to sit down and go over that budget, and we'll help you. And if they keep coming back asking for help with the electric bill without talking to us, then at some point we're going to say, look, you're not taking this seriously. But that's not a big picture thing. But I think church's willingness to get to find practical ministries, maybe it's pre-retirement. So I know kind of some of the stuff you've talked about in your various chapters have been more about specific instruments and pensions and all that kind of thing. And but I just think most churches aren't equipped for that. That would take specialists from different congregations or different denominations to put something like that, together. I think of like the Christian healthcare co-ops. I forget, don't know any of their names, but like health insurance alternatives. That you see that there as they're trying to do a Christian model of sharing those health expenses. I don't know if that's really feasible in some sort of retirement thing, but that's for other people to explore. But I think helping people, being willing to talk about finances, because somewhere in your writing, I saw about that reluctance to have those conversations, particularly maybe about ministers or salaries and everything, and so where there's no transparency, when we're not talking about it, I think it's like it's such a big part of people's lives, and it's largely off limits to many churches.
Yeah,
like other than give money to church, give money to whoever, like give away what you got, but beyond that, I think it's not a lot of conversation.
Yeah. So Crown Financial Ministries is that's part of like I guess evangelical Christianity's history within the second half of the 20th century, that Ramsey himself kind of like is born out of and born from. He kind of continues that legacy. It's just everybody knows Ramsey, not as many people know Crown. So one last question in light of Ramsey, and then we'll move on. But D.L. Mayfield, who wrote The Myth of the American Dream, she doesn't like Ramsey very much, and
I noticed that.
And in my research, what Ramsey seems to suggest is kind of like what Ghilarducci says, yeah, don't do that. But in our conversation with Ghilarducci, she says, no, the 401k could work. It's just it depends on what 401k you use. And she just might be saying that as well, thinking like, well, there's really nothing else that people can utilize right now. So I'll go ahead and say the 401k, just use this particular type of 401k that's low fee, etc. But D.L. Mayfield says Ramsey's material has unfortunately been more of a pagan and extremely influential exponent of the American dream affluence than promoting the economic life of Jubilee. Agree, disagree, explain. What do you guys
So
think?
I'll go first this time, Patrick. You can
All
gather
right.
your response.
I'm
You can
still
be.
trying to figure out how I want to box myself in here.
Yeah. So I think that firstly, I don't want to get into calling Ramsey names.
Yeah.
But I do think what he's pushing, his ministry is about helping people realize the American dream. This is how you can realize the American dream. And there's a little bit of there of, he in my experience, he throws in some ideas of stewardship. He throws in, or uses the word stewardship, whatever that means. He throws in, give to the church and, tithe or whatever. I think tithing is part of what he talks about. But, he's not, I remember a long time ago reading a book where a guy was talking about capping his income and reverse tithing, getting enough income that he could live on 10%, give away 90. I don't think Ramsey's ever going there. He's like, you tithe your 10%, the rest of it's what you want, and God bless you. That's your Christian dream. And so, that's I think that's probably what she's referring to. That said, I think he has helped a lot of people avoid pitfalls, because it's not just you. I saw where you mentioned ministers not having any financial training in seminary, and that was 100% true in my case. But most people don't really have financial training,
right?
Just in financial literacy, across the country is in the educational systems of the country is not particularly high. So I think he's been a very effective voice for raising that understanding and getting people out of financial difficulty. So I think that's been good. But as a Christian ministry and theological, I don't see a whole lot there.
Okay. Patrick,
that was very diplomatic.
Yeah. Real quick, Patrick, your thoughts, and we'll move on.
I guess the only thing that I would add to that is that Ramsey's solution always is make more money, spend less money until you have enough money, and then do whatever you want, making sure that you tithe. Not everybody can just make more money. How does that ethic apply to the disabled community? Immigrant communities that may not have work permits or may not be employable, may not have employable skills. How does this apply to the single mother with 5 kids? There is no real ethic there. It's simple mathematics with some Christian-like ish, some Christianese affirmations or affirmations, and sometimes just some stuff thrown out there without any real work on the ethical religious side. Just prayer works, and let's all rise and clap now. And I've been on all sides of Ramsey, and I think the real key to his benefit is that he does help people from making some of the least intelligent financial decisions you can make. That's a core part of his program, and I think that's great.
And I'll just, if I can jump back in just to say, like, an example is stewardship, which is a biblical principle, but I think stewardship, at least as I've seen it perhaps in Ramsey and then perhaps even in many churches, is just don't spend more money than, like, be as tight as you can, be as fiscally stingy as you can possibly be, is really what it means. And so rather than stewardship being use God's, like, spend, be prodigal, in your spending, and give it away, serve people, make a difference in your community and in your world. That is stewardship. Right? Stewardship biblical stewardship is give it away, be generous, not be fiscally tight and restrictive. And so I think that there's the word has been distorted, by those folks, and our church is hurt because of it.
I remember one elder was describing this to my dad. He said, "You can't take money to the grave, and you can't take debt to the grave. So the church should be the most in debt institution because we believe that we're going to heaven." So their philosophy was, let's use banks and leverage and assets and for the kingdom, for whatever building project. I mean, at that time, I think it was the boon of everybody was building new buildings, so maybe misguided a little bit, but that idea in corporate America actually is to leverage certain assets so that you grow your business and your impact, and debt utilization is there, and somehow we've kind of created more of a debt is bad all the time, and missed a little bit of kind of some of the things where Jesus seems to ask us to be pretty shrewd when it comes to money. And the shrewd manager is a good example of that parable, where it's like, this is an uncomfortable money parable here, where he just basically takes advantage of his boss and his company. But yeah, I appreciate what you guys are saying. I'm not usually a Dave Ramsey fan. I will say that I have come to realize that one of the greatest gifts is the idea, and that's where his church-facing program of financial peace comes in, is if we can help people not be stressed and anxious about money, then they can be more present to what God is up to in their life. And I think the same thing can actually happen when we're good savers and when we're good budgeters, is we can be obsessed about money. And it may not be the thing that's keeping us up at night because we have debt, but it's keeping us up at night because we're trying to be masters of it. We're trying to control it. And some of the people I know who have a lot of investment in their money, really, they may still have millions of dollars or thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars investments, but when it spikes or when it goes down, they are all consumed by it. And so, you can be anxious about money, even if you're not in debt. And I think that's where I would say, let's focus on the financial peace idea of being non-anxious presence when it comes to money. And I do think that some of the principles Ramsey has are good tools for that. But I like what you guys were saying. It seems a little bit more, and I would agree with Mayfield, that it's caught up more in American capitalism and maybe not as biblical as it appears. But yeah, I'm excited to endeavor into the uncomfortable sphere of talking about money, and we get to ask you guys some questions about your own retirement. And so, Jordan, fire away.
All right, my favorite part. Okay, so tell me, guys, what are you currently utilizing to save for retirement right now, and ballpark how much you think you got saved so far for that last third of life? Peter, why don't you go ahead first?
Yeah, so I think one of the things to consider in all of this is whether it's a single income or dual income family, because when you're talking about pastors and the church and the responsibilities, I think that really becomes complicated in terms of if it's dual income, that changes the math a bit, but it shouldn't change the relationship between the church and the individuals. So and so many churches, I think, seem to have an expectation that it'll be a single income family, and so that puts a greater onus on the congregation to provide. But if it's dual income, then that, as I say, changes the math. We're a single income at the moment, so here's the funny thing. In Australia, it's a 10%. It was less than that when I was in. So in 1995 to 1999, 2000-ish, I was in Australia, and it was compulsory. They have compulsory retirement savings if you're full-time employed, your employer has to pay, right now it's 10.5% of your income into a retirement account. So every full-time permanent employee in the country has every year 10% put into retirement, just the equivalent of a 401k. But so in that 5 years of being an entry-level accountant, and some of it was a minister, what I saved there, I only recently got caught up to with my 20 years of ministry. For most of my ministry, I've put in $100 a month, and that was my own savings. The church didn't put in anything. That changed recently. Maybe just 2 years ago, we started a 403b. It's all been in a Roth IRA, Ramsey. But we started 403b. It's kind of been a bit complicated, but I've always had a financial advisor rather than just putting it into a fund. But so I've always had somebody who's actively working with that. But it still hasn't got us that far. So between my wife, from her working time, my time working as outside ministry as well as in ministry, we're apparently, according to your figures, over average, and we're somewhere approaching $100,000. But I got 20 years left to get the other 900,000.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable.
You're putting the 1 million as the benchmark, Peter. Is that? I'm just teasing you about the benchmark thing.
What is it? So yeah, that's a benchmark, right? So
it is, yeah, absolutely. Pick a number.
Yeah.
All right, Patrick, what say you?
Yeah, so if you'd asked me this question a year ago, I would have had a different set of answers.
Right.
But currently, I have divested my retirement investments, thanks to having them invested in Roth IRAs in order to take care of some personal financial and otherwise crises right now. And I think that's and perhaps an underutilized accolade of savings, and another selling point for the Roth IRA. You can take out what you have put in without any penalty. And there are times when life emergencies just say, wow, I really didn't have that anywhere. And without a land and neighbors to come over and, help rebuild that barn, you have to find some way to do it from the excess resources. So right now I have nothing saved for retirement. Previously was using a Roth IRA in a brokerage account, self-managed, and was getting good 15 to 20% year-over-year returns.
Okay. Great. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. In light of that reality that you are experiencing right now, guys, question 3. Teresa Ghilarducci says that the new class divide for Americans is one's level of retirement anxiety in her book, Rescuing Retirement. How would you rate your retirement anxiety right now as a COC pastor in light of being in this DIY retirement crisis, from 0 to 10, 10 being the most anxious?
Maybe a 3.
A 3. Okay. Peter, what about you, man?
Yeah, I think I'm so far behind the 8 ball. It's not even worth worrying about.
Yeah.
Honestly,
that's kind of it.
Yeah. So I mean, I go back to like $100 a month, and it's like I knew it was woefully inadequate, but I couldn't do any more.
Right.
And it's like, how many people in my church have any idea that that's what I was doing? Because none of them, anyone that had a full-time job would be happy with that. My elders are aware of what I'm doing because I've told them. Well, they're not doing that, and so
interesting.
that it's just there's no point even thinking about retirement, because I put in what I can.
Yeah.
And that's really all there is.
Okay.
So I don't have anxiety about it. I don't know what's going to happen.
You've just
I don't
kind
have
of
plans, but I mean,
you're just have kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You just, is this it is what it is. So yeah, I'm not going to expend the energy, to worry about it. Interesting. Okay, so
when the
last year I was
Titanic's sinking, just kind of pick your piece of driftwood, right?
right. So last year I was able to rearrange some things, and so I was able to afford life insurance for the first time. So at least that side of it is that if something happens to me, my wife's provided for. And, so I think that's up until that point, we're both, sinking. But if I sink first, then she can actually get on a lifeboat and go to Honolulu or something. So but I think that gives her a greater sense of
security. Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. Thank you for sharing that, guys. So the question 4, again, we've probably already touched a little bit on this, but is there anything you can share beyond what you've already shared in terms of telling your story from the angle of retirement savings, being a pastor within Churches of Christ?
I think I would I understand because of my accounting background, I'm involved quite a bit in the budget process here at the church. So I understand how it works. The church has X amount of money in a pot, and they say, this is what we can afford to fund employing someone. Now, how's that going to be divided up? And so really it's then the individual that says, okay, if I'll just take some average round number figures. Okay, pay me $50,000 salary, pay me, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000 for insurance, and let's take 10% of whatever for retirement. And you go, okay, that's $65,000. Okay, and that's the pot. Now that pot may or may not increase in future years, but from the church perspective, they don't care what your retirement is. They don't care what your health insurance is. They don't care what your salary is. They're just, what's our cost to us is $65,000. And you arrange it how you want. And so that's I think a very practical way for them of approaching it. But it's not a very proactive sense. An alternative would be a missionary I know went to Argentina. He got support by a church where everybody was engineers, worked for GM, big company, and they said, we're going to make sure that you have retirement money going into your account while you're in Argentina. And so they were proactive because they were all used to their retirement as one of their benefits. And they said, okay, here's the support you're raising, but I don't see anything there for retirement. You need to have money in retirement, and so you need to increase the amount that you're fundraising. You need to make sure that that's taken care of and that you're building that. And so I think if churches were really proactive about that, it'd make a huge difference. I believe strongly that churches should be the best places to be employed. Yeah. And I don't think most churches have that moniker, have that value or that goal.
Right. Patrick, how would you answer that based upon your story and what you haven't shared already?
Yeah, I mean, I have yet to meet the church that understands minister finances, including churches with CPAs running their administrative and financial areas of responsibility. They just don't know. And so they don't care because they don't know to care. And to Peter's point, they're looking at what's our cost. If you're on that side of the business, so to speak, you're interested in what is our cost. The church, however, is more than a small business enterprise, right? It's not what's our cost, but what are we doing through that? amount of money, and are we giving enough?
Yeah.
And I think that is the mentality that we need to bring to all areas of church ministry. Certainly, minister retirement has my blessing to be one of the first few places that goes. But a different way to analyze what we're doing as a church and the value of money in a church. It's not so much how much of it do we have, but what are we doing with what we have?
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Lars, any thoughts before we move on to question 6?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I think you guys are on it in terms of we don't necessarily need more experts. We probably need a little bit more actual, like, boots on the ground practice. Less Bible studies and more Bible doings. And the same would go here. And I think our churches could shift our thinking a little bit by saying, okay, health insurance, retirement, even life insurance, some of these things shouldn't be, here's a stipend, you figure out what is most essential for your family and do the DIY thing. I think churches should step into that gap a little bit. And we've done this. I mean, a lot of churches have done this when they've done the minister housing situation. I mean, this has been in the practice with the parsonage, which wasn't necessarily a great option. It definitely hurt many ministers with retirement, but they were saying, here's a benefit. We'll let you stay. And in California, Jordan and I have both been recipients of that. It's like, here, the rent is so high to live in this part of town, but we want you to be able to invest in this part of town. So we own a parsonage. We own a house. And I think the same could be true. We're not going to pay you maybe as much as you might need to live in this part of town, but we'll help provide housing. Well, the same should be true with retirement. You may not get paid enough to invest like the stockbroker down the street is in his own retirement, but we're going to contribute money to a retirement, or we're going to take out, you might not be able to afford a life insurance policy, but we're going to take out a life insurance policy on the minister. So, there are some vehicles out there that churches could take advantage of on behalf of the minister, for the minister. And it's, it doesn't just mean we pay them a really high salary so they can go off and get their own retirement at a really high rate. And I just think it's not just about getting churches to pay their minister more. It's maybe about allocating resources in a different way. I think salaries could increase. I mean, it's just why the national conversation around teacher salaries is under discussion right now. And I think we could have the same one. But I do think there's some stepping stones there that you guys touched on tonight, and I think that's helpful. But yeah, Jordan, let's keep rolling through here. Question 6, I think.
I think it's 5, and we've kind of touched on this
right.
already. But do you think being in Churches of Christ has hurt or helped your asset accumulation for retirement? And kind of explain your answer. Patrick, looks like you're ready.
Yeah, I'll say it absolutely hasn't helped.
Yeah.
And I can describe that in a couple of ways. One is, as a minister, especially starting out in Churches of Christ, the church doesn't know anything about it, so they are not going to tell you anything. You don't know anything about it, so you're not going to know anything. And you're not going to find out what you don't know until you've done something that triggers one of those buzzers that says, whoa, you did something you're not allowed to do, or whoa, that was close, right? And so you just don't know.
Yeah.
There's no HR department, there's no employee benefits manual, where you can just say, okay, now what is this? And I don't think it's anyone's malintent, but it's just a mess. Yeah. And so that's kind of your orientation, and that never really gets any better. You just keep carrying all of that with you. And if churches could get good information and would actually read it and act on it, and I mean, it's a good thing that we are in a church podcast here, because I'm asking for a miracle. But if we could equip churches better, then it would work out the ministry side of things. If we could convince churches to listen to their ministers and then equip the ministers, well, that would be just a double victory. But too often the people who have the expertise don't have the trust, and those who have the trust of the room have no expertise. Yeah. And too little humility.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay not to be the expert, but it's important to recognize, hey, somebody's asking a question and I don't totally get it. We need to get somebody in here who can help us understand, really top to bottom.
That's good. That's good. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think it helps. Like, our sort of career path, so to speak, is you start off in youth ministry, and then after a few years, you go up to, big pulpit ministry or something else. But youth ministers, more than anyone, are, they're going to be low paid and certainly not have anything in retirement. When I was in college, I had a job with a stockbroker, financial advisor, and for a couple of years. And I remember one of the tools that we used to show was like, put your money into your 401k, IRA, whatever, and compounding interest and the difference it can make. If you put $100 a month, starting at age 20, 18 or something, when you graduate high school, what that's going to look like at 65, with compounding interest, versus, if you start at, 15, 20 years later, is, very different. And so we start off with our youth ministers at the bottom of the rung. Yeah. They don't get, nobody says, hey, you need to be making sure that you're putting money into retirement. But that was the message I had to all my brothers and sisters that were coming behind me. I'm in college. And I'm like, guys, you got to start doing this. And they didn't. So, and even like the Cyber Institute and their, their surveys, my elders wouldn't even know it exists. So that's great that they're doing it. But, I've always ministered in churches of under 120, about 5-6 different churches of that size. Wow. And so they don't have resources, they don't have any comparisons. They maybe talk to someone else in town and go, do you know what your minister makes? But they don't see the whole package. So I mean, that's just if you've got a denominational structure. I have a brother that's an Anglican minister, and they're very structured, and guidelines and standards, expectations, and so it's there's a lot of negatives to being autonomous. When it comes to providing for ministers, not just preaching pastors, but whatever.
Gil Ducci said that, she referenced a study on denomination pensions in our episode, and Episcopalians were doing the best because they're centralized and they had a lot of money in there, so their ministers are going to do the best in retirement. And obviously, we are the opposite of centralized, and therefore we're struggling. So number 6, again, we've touched on it. We could just briefly answer this one. What do you think are the challenges to save for retirement as a pastor? But also, what are the benefits are there, if any, as a pastor within Churches of Christ? If not being autonomous, are there any benefits? So challenges and benefits. What do you guys think?
The obvious challenge is leaving that money marked for investment, for savings. That's the obvious challenge. Right. If it's $100 a month, there's going to be at least a half dozen other things that are going to compete for that $100 that month. And that's the nature of church life. The salaries are not exquisite. and we're always going to have competing priorities for this. So that that's a real challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, there's a little bit as we talk. There's a little bit of cry me a river kind of thing. Anybody that's got their own small business has similar or worse struggles. So but compared to somebody that has an employer pension plan or even an employer retirement plan, that money is guaranteed to be set aside. For regardless of what you say about how it's being invested and what the returns are and if that's really the best thing, but at least the money's there. And so I think, we're going to see a greater crisis as churches, shrink, as they're, you outline what that's going to be. I just, it's increasingly difficult for churches to be able to provide for their staff the way that they should or that they would like to necessarily.
Right. Right.
I can't really think of financial benefits within Church of Christ.
No, I haven't been able to imagine any.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Lars, any thought before we jump to the next?
No, I think I've said all of my piece on that in other episodes. So,
okay.
But yeah, I appreciate you guys' comments there.
Yeah.
You're consistent with my experience.
Yeah. So guys, is there in your mind, like, hey, this is the greatest help in terms of you being able to save for retirement as a pastor, or is there not that when it comes to your mind?
I mean, direct debit is, I think, the best possible thing you can do is take the money out before it's yours so that you have it later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. You're probably asking the wrong people. First of all, let's just qualify it. But I think direct debit. So like right now, I'm in a better place than I was 5 years ago. For two reasons. One is that my retirement is linked to my income. So if I get a raise, cost of living a raise, 5%, 2%, my retiment's going to go up the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've linked those two. So my retirement isn't getting left behind by
inflation,
my salary,
etc.
Just to put them both up. So I think that's important. And the other is that the church sends the check for my retirement portion. This was a change we made. They never sent anything, but now they're the ones that send the check.
Okay.
I think that gives them greater ownership of it. They know, they're aware. Whereas as opposed to me with my $100 a month, that was just a me thing.
Okay.
Even though I mentioned my elders at times, but yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. So we've already kind of touched on question 8 in under the first question in terms of the theological and ethical ideal in terms of saving for living and retirement. So let me just say this. Do you think the Nazareth Manifesto is that the best theological, ethical way of thinking about this? Or do you have something that you think in your mind might be better?
I got to be honest. I struggle to apply that.
Okay.
I think I'd have to read more of your thesis to get my head around it.
Yeah.
As to how it particularly applies this. For me, I think there's a missional element to it that it's really difficult for me as a minister to people when I'm under that sort of anxiety or stress, if I'm kind of in a situation now because we have some medical expenses, I can't go to lunch with people. So how do I? Because if I can't afford to go to a diner and spend $15 on a hamburger, which is an expensive hamburger, I suppose, but I'm also missing out on that 1 hour of conversation that I might get with somebody who's working on their lunch break. So my financial restrictions can make it difficult to engage my community. Or if I'm going to volunteer at the elementary school, but I have to work something if I want to be on a board or something committee or something, like how involved can I be in these community spaces if there's a cost to it and I don't have the finances to be able to manage that cost. So I think that's not specific to retirement, but I think that's part of it. If my energy is being spent towards those financial considerations, then to me, it's a missional element that it impacts my relationships with people in my community.
Okay. All right. Patrick, any thought there or?
No, I'm going to leave that one with Peter.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Well flown and landed, sir.
All right. Final couple questions here as we are running out of time. So, and I think we've even already answered question 9. Question 9 is, what have you done well? What do you need to do differently? Churches too. I think we've touched on that. I don't think we need to really answer that again. So let's end with question 10. What would you tell a new pastor or pastor in training about saving for retirement while in ministry? What do you think?
Start immediately and insist on a salary that allows you to do that. Present that as one of your financial priorities in negotiating your salary. Break down a sample budget and say, well, it's a priority for me. It's a Christian, theological, ethical priority for me to do this. And, so here's how I see that going. And, make sure you're being fair to yourself, but churches don't do the math. The elders don't do the math. They just look at the math of last year's total revenue and this year's estimated expenses. That's the only math that is done there. And ministers need to do the math for our churches and make sure that they see it. They understand what it is they're asking us to agree to.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Peter, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I would. I think transparency. I mean, without getting into too much detail with the church, but yeah, like I said before, I want them to be aware of whatever their pot is, whatever their cost is. I want them to know where it's going in broad. So, what they're giving me, they don't pay taxes. I pay taxes. I pay Social Security. Okay, so take that off the top. Now take my health insurance off the top. Now take my retirement off the top. Here's what I get, even as pre-tax. Mm-hmm. And so this is my gross income. And so just so we're all on the page, this is what I'm getting paid, and this is what these other expenses are. So this is my salary, and these are my other expenses. I think that's really important. And then, as Patrick said, just start letting that interest compound. And be regular, be committed to whatever amount it is that you start as early as you can. Because it doesn't matter whatever instrument you choose and whatever the market fluctuations are, it's always better to start early than to be cramming at the end. And so I think that would probably be 2 things.
Great. Awesome. Lars, any concluding thoughts from our conversation with these Mid-Atlantic pastors?
Yeah, I know. I appreciate you guys sharing with us just some good questions. And I mean, tonight, looking at the theology stuff, it's helpful, I think, to wrestle with how do we take something that's maybe not chapter and verseable, but then actually put some things into practice. And I think, moving targets are hard to have. I mean, we talk about education and what's good preparation for ministry, and that almost feels like a moving target. Do you need a master's degree? Do you need an undergraduate degree? Do you need a preaching school degree, a Bible college degree, a seminary, a doctorate? What do you need education wise? And I think the same is true of our conversation with retirement and stuff. But I would encourage people to start earlier. And one of the nuggets I think from tonight was transparency. I don't remember. I think both you, Peter, and Patrick brought up transparency and just the need for us to start having these conversations. And not everybody's going to quickly get on board with it, but I was surprised in already a bunch of our conversations, Jordan, just how many different ministers are aware of things like housing and the parsonage issue that has been there in the past, or aware that their churches are starting to adopt some sort of 403B or 401k similar option. And I think part of that is because ministers are starting to have these conversations. And so if we can get even more transparency, maybe in 20 years, people will watch this podcast and go, I can't believe in the dark ages, in the 2020s, that no pastors knew, their churches didn't do this. Maybe eventually, Peter, will be like Australia and it'll just be automatic, but I'm not sure that's in the cards for a while. But I would just say let's get the conversation going more often. You'd be surprised how gracious your elders may be if you just start talking about it. And I think that's what I would say to myself even 10 years ago. Talk about it. Don't bemoan that they're not doing it for you until you ask. And I don't want to put the burden on ministers too much to say, you have not because you don't ask. But I do think there's a little bit of that transparency there that we just need to start the conversations and risk a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those last concluding thoughts. Lars, Patrick, did you want to say something?
No, I just said right on. That's it.
Oh, okay. Right on. Yeah. Okay. So, guys, thanks for joining us for these 90 minutes tonight. I know it's late on the Eastern time zone on the East Coast, speaking from the West Coast, Lars and I are, but we appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable and kind of just sharing your story. And hopefully that this episode is going to be helpful. I believe this episode is going to be very helpful for anyone who does listen to it, pastor or otherwise. So guys, if you're viewing this video on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, this is episode 12. We thank you for tuning in, and in the next couple weeks or months, anticipate our final 4 episodes to come out pretty soon. So guys, until then, we will see you next time. Bye. Once again, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Almost Essential podcast. If you like what you heard and you want to reach out, you can connect with me, Jordan Koss, on Facebook or Instagram. We hope this series is a valuable resource for you, pastor or otherwise. And remember, you are not almost essential. Your role and service in the church is essential, as well as saving for retirement within your holy vocation and calling.